evening, everybody, and welcome all of you to what promises to be a really, really interesting event. We are joined by Humberto Jardim from Henriques and we have and Jo Locke, MW as well, who is our buyer from Madeira, and we have some really beautiful wines. So I'll pass over to you now, Jo, if you'd like to do an introduction yourself, and then I'll be in the background just fielding questions.
Emma, thank you very much indeed. So good evening. Welcome to this celebration of Madeira. We're going to be tasting 6 wines in the company of Humberto, who very kindly hosted me for a fascinating morning back in May when I visited the property, or more than one property. And it really brings home, and I think he's going to be able to share with some of the images he has, the complexities, the beauty, the challenges of Madeira. And hopefully this evening will help us all to understand better the different styles, both by tasting them, if you're lucky enough to have one or more of the bottles in front of you, as I do, or indeed just looking at the vineyards, hearing about the production methods, and understanding some of the history which makes these wines what they are. Henriques is one of only 8 major producers on the island. There are about 1,750 growers, so it's an almighty complex picture, a fascinating patchwork, and I think we're going to see that a little bit more of that. So Humberto, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us. May I hand over to you?
Yes, thank you very much. Good evening to everybody. I hope that I can give you a little picture of what Madeira is about. We are at the facilities of Henriques and Henriques. This is the aging cellar. We have it nearby the sea level, so the heat here inside is quite good for the aging process that we have, and it makes a huge difference when we are on heights on our other property at Quinta Grande, which is at 350 to 500 meters high. So the temperature there is lower. We have much more humidity. And that's what makes the whole difference of this, because in some of these wines, by sweating, they will show a concentration with different flavors, which obviously, if they are nearby the sea, the losses in alcohol and water are different when compared to heights at 350 to even 400 meters or 500 meters, as we have our property at Quinta Grande. I would like to underline that Madeira doesn't produce styles. We produce grapes, and we have conquered the island by planting grapes since the early 1400s. This is why when Jo was mentioning that we have so many wine growers in such a small property, I would say that 460 hectares, it's the most that we have here in terms of area, even though we have 60, almost 55 to 60% of our area planted with Tinta Negra. We have, in fact, almost 1,000 wine growers due to the fact that along the generations, these properties have been fragmented. They have been transmitted from grandfathers to grandfathers and so on. One of the problems that we have nowadays is exactly that, as the reassembling of the properties here in Madeira, because the average area for a wine grower is only 3,000 square meters. So you can understand that we have to buy to more than 400 to 500 wine growers every single year. And that's a nightmare, because we have the lack of manpower, which is all over the world, but especially on such a small island, it really becomes even more difficult. But anyway, I just want to underline that we have planted Malvasia, which came from Greece. It came from Heraklion in those days, the kingdom of Candia. And this is why we call Malvasia Candida. It's the same Malvasia that we have in the whole Bay Area of the Mediterranean. So it's the same as Lipari, is the same in Spain, is the same in Croatia with Istria. So all of the Malvasias have the same 12 descriptors, which show that this Malvasia historically was the one very much appreciated, especially in our case, because it shows wonderful in terms of the phenolic compounds, the outcome of the fermentation, the stoppage of the fermentation in one way or a fantastic compound of richness, which is in fact very distinct. But then we had to conquer this mountain, and after 300 meters or around that, Malvasia would not succeed. So our solution was to bring Malvasia fina from Porto and start to plant it, and nowadays we call it Bual, but it was the one which really conquered a little bit more and further on the heights of this island. This is an island which is based on two peaks, sort of saying, Pico do Arieiro, Pico Ruivo, which reaches around 2,000 meters high. So if you measure the island from east-west, we have 56 kilometers, one line to the other, one point to the other, and north-south, we have around 25 kilometers, which means that from 740 square kilometers, this is quite a small island, and with these peaks, we suffer a lot with the clouds, sort of saying we don't have the heat to push upwards these clouds, and during the period before the veraison, we have a maturation, which is very much clouded. We have what we call the helmet weather during the June, and then we have a high level of acidity due to the fact that we don't have a potential in terms of alcohol. Let's say that the average this year was quite strange, but usually Madeira has around 9.5 of expected potential alcohol. This year was amazing because we usually open in the 1st of September as the official day for the harvest. But on this day, this year, we had 85% of our production already treated by the producers. So you can imagine with this climate changes, the consequences that we have all over the world, but particularly in Madeira, it was even comfortable because we can even say that we produced a bit more than last year. We had a higher level of potential alcohol, which surpassed 10 this year, 10.4, if I'm not wrong. And even though we had some difficulties with the heat, obviously our summer was incredibly hot this year. Very good for tourism, but quite difficult for agriculture and particularly to the wine grower. It was surprising that at these conditions we had such a quality as we have this year. Just to say that after the Bual, as I was mentioning, we moved further on and we conquered the mountain with Verdelho. And on the top of the mountain, we have Sercial, which obviously shows much more in terms of the acidity, after all I have mentioned concerning the microclimates and heights and clouds and all of this, which is very important in terms of the maturation of our grapes. Sercial is the one which really shows the difficulties here on the island. There's no other grape on these, even Tinta Negra, which can survive at 1,000 meters and struggle with nature at this level, especially because it rains. We are not on the parallel of wine. We should say that we are at the same line of Casablanca. So this is to say that it rains when it should not. It doesn't rain when it should. And these difficulties show that Madeira has everything against it. We have gone around by alcoholizing our wines after the process that we do and stopping the fermentation in order to provoke the pathway to the aging. We do it the other way around. As you can see, most of the fortified wines, but particularly if we think of a vintage port, you will see that they are producing this wine after 2 years and putting it in the bottle and saying, buy the bottle and drink in 5 years. You'll have a nice evolution of this wine by reduction. Madeira says, well, if you want a vintage, which unfortunately we cannot use anymore the word vintage because it was registered to port, as you probably know. So we have a very easy word now, which is fresqueira. It's easy to say, fresqueira or garrafeira. It was a word that probably should have been a little bit thought further in order to simplify. But anyway, this is to say that we need at least 20 years for it to be elected as a vintage or a garrafeira, I should say, because we, in fact, we live from leftovers. when we look into our wine, we are using these dated wines every single year to produce the cash cow of our business. We produce the 10-year-old, the 15-year-old, the 20-year-old, the wines, and after a certain time, our chief winemaker will say, please taste these wines because we only have 2,000 or 3,000 liters of it. And we are tasting it in order to understand if it is going to become a colheita or eventually allow it to evolve a little further in order to become a garrafeira. So that is the leftover of an account which has been used to produce the current wines, starting from 3, 5, 10, 15. We live in Madeira from leftovers. There's no way for us to invent and say we have a way to foresee the evolution of a wine at the harvest. It's absolutely impossible. We don't have a crystal ball to understand what will be the decision that we will take along the aging of these wines, even the conditions and the climate conditions which will influence these wines along the aging process. So the result is after 10, 15, after this transformation of the phenolic compounds, which will make understand what happened to the wine, because we have 3 levels of evolution of these wines. Let's say that we control the first process of oxidation. The second one is the aging process, so the transformation of the phenolics which we have extracted from the skins. And this is something very unique, because what we want to have in Madeira is exactly what we don't want to find in table wine. We want crystallized fruits, we want dry fruits, we want to feel some orange peel confit, some herbal notes, some chocolate, some dates, figs. All of those compounds that you can get from these dried fruits especially are a characteristic of Madeira. And that takes time. You need to provoke the aging on canteiro, or if you want it earlier in the market, you need to cross the hot house, which means that we will submit these wines during 3 months on the hot house, which means the estufa, so at 45 degrees centigrade. And that is a process which probably people think, oh, this is forcing the wines. Yes, we need to enslave our wines in order for them to understand that they need to become what Madeira is about. This crystallization, this transformation of the phenolic compounds into all of what we understand from Madeira, that is provoked at the aging. We have the other side, which is the aging under the canteiro. At that level, we will have losses. So we will have water losses, we will have alcohol losses. And at that point, we will understand that we will have some styles which will show more on the acidic side, because the acids don't go anywhere. What we will lose is only the volatiles. And it depends where we have it, because if we have more humidity outside, and the barrels act as a membrane of the cell. So all of these barrels that you see behind me, they are containing these wines, but also breathing, allowing them to breathe. And that is the secret of this, because the losses, if I have it in a humid place, the alcohol, which has a density just above 0.78, will collide with the humidity outside. And what will mingle with the humidity outside is the water from the wine. So when we get into a warehouse which is drier, the losses are the one which is running the faster. So it's outside, it's not so, in terms of humidity, not so demanding to the wine. So the one which runs the fastest is the alcohol. So we'll have different profiles of these wines acting under the circumstances of the terroir of Madeira, which is exactly the warehouse. What takes long to produce these wines is exactly the warehouse. It makes a huge difference. So we probably should start tasting the first wine. I have done this introduction for you to understand what was going through on all of these wines. So the first one that we have here, this is the Verdelho. I suppose that you can see it well. This is the Verdelho 5-year-old. This is coming out from our own vineyard. So this little QG that you have here is Quinta Grande. It is located in between 350 meters high up to 750 meters high. So it shows from above like this. This is the one that you see on your left side of the screen. This is showing our vineyard up this corner up here. It has 700 meters and 50 meters high, and down there near the warehouse, it's at 300 meters high. So all of that is the pathway where we need. This is impossible to mechanize. It is demanding in terms of manpower. And there you have 10 hectares. So from this vineyard, we have a yield of 3.5 thousand kilos, which means that we have around 35 tons a year. It depends of the year. Obviously, this year was a little bit less, but usually we have 35 tons of Verdelho every single year. So the note that you will understand from Verdelho, it's exactly what we call the Mediterranean fruits. So the first approach is on the guava, on the orange peel confit, on the nectarine. So this is, and why, when you look at this and say, well, probably you are producing 5-year-old because you have Verdelho. Exactly. We wouldn't do that because, as you know, only 20% of what we do on the island is coming from the white grapes. We have 55% of the area planted with Tinta Negra, producing 80% of what we do, and 45% of the area producing the white grapes. So it doesn't make any sense to produce these wines on the 5-year-old, especially because they would collide with the same level of market share of the Tinta Negra 5-year-old. So the distinction to this is the fact that we have Verdelho in our Quinta, and we wanted to aim a different target of the market. We wanted to show Madeira with a level of simplicity, but already some complexity. When you taste this wine, it shows already some evolution. It shows what these wines in 5 years can become only in Canteiro. This did not cross the hot house. So at the end, you have the expression of a soft, polished, and very easygoing wine aimed to a new generation, which doesn't want complication in terms of the oxidative process, has money enough to pay, because in terms of value for money, this is very much achievable and easy for the combination, the celebration of life. One of the messages that I like very much to bring into the market is what for is Madeira. Because at the moment that we talk about Madeira, Madeira will always be classified as a sweet, medium dry, and dry. That is somehow simplifying the image of what Madeira is about, because we write on our labels the varietal. We talk about Malvasia, Verdelho, Bual, and Sercial, and people, if they arrive on the bottle and they bottle store and they don't know why should they buy a Sercial or buy a Malvasia, then they are only buying Madeira without knowing what Madeira is about. What for is Madeira? And we have profiles here. So after tasting this, which goes wonderfully well, pairing with dry meat, with the charcuterie, even with some, we have tasted this wine in a restaurant on an experience with Wagyu beef, and it was a fantastic combination because we had this orangine flavors and dates, which could pair with obviously the acidity, but the acidity should be looked as freshness rather than something which can be pungent. Let's look into this as a triangle. We have the acidity, the integration on the alcohol, and the residual sugar. All of this has to be a sustain to the flavor, to underline what Verdelho is about, what Bual is about. So people will say, oh, this flavor is pleasing me. I can think of a dry cheese. I can think of a melting cheese or a different consommé, raw fish, salmon, tuna, anything of this, a pate, and I can think of Madeira to combine. Certain times we have, which wine would you prefer from Madeira? I don't prefer. It's which moment do I prefer to have Madeira in a different pairing, because it's impossible. We have to think of Madeira as we think of an orchestra. You have violins on the left side and cellos on the right side. Probably you will say that you have the violins connecting with the Sercial. If you go further, you have the violas with the Verdelho, because the sugar content is higher, the fruits are different, the Mediterranean notes are a little bit deeper when you compare them on the Sercial. On the other side, you have the Bual, which probably will connect with the cellos, and deep down you have the Malvasia, which will have more than 100 grams of residual sugar and show a note which on us, we are processing on the right side of our brain. So this is what Madeira is about whenever we are focusing our attention on the flavors rather than on the profile, on dry, medium, sweet. Because even these wines, whenever they evolve to a very old wine, we can start with 70 grams on a Verdelho when it is vinified. But after sweating and after concentrating, we might reach to some of these wines which surpass 100 grams. I have to tell you that we have a Terrantez, this one, based on 74, 76 grams of residual sugar. But we have the same Terrantez, the same exactly grape from 1954, which is 126 grams of residual sugar. And it started at 7. So you see how much it has lost in terms of the aging process in order to bring it upwards in terms of the residual sugar and even the expression of the acidity, which I will talk further on. So we should probably move and compare now the Sercial 10-year-old. This is the one that I have here. I hope that you are easily seeing it. This is the silver one on the Sercial 10-year-old. So this is a mountain wine. This is showing how difficult this grape struggles in nature. This is in total acidity, almost 8. In terms of residual sugar, just below 60. And well, in terms of density, as you see, this is more the tasting notes on this Sercial are much more on the zesty flavors, apple-ish flavors, but especially the acidity is showing this recently cut grass. It's like crossing the field, the football field, when they are passing the machine, and you can feel this greenish, which is the first approach. And it's interesting because when we think of a blend, which is this exactly one, this is a blend which we sign from the signature of the winemaker to make a 10-year-old on the profile of what is Tinta Negra, what is Sercial from Henriques and Henriques. But then you have the next one, which is wonderful to compare. It's a 2001 Sercial again. Try to check on the pictures that I have here. Hope that I'm showing it well. This is the same grape, but now showing it in a different profile. This is a single harvest. So a single wine from a single year. It is not a blend. It's a wine that we have brought by hand since it got into our warehouse, and one of the leftovers from 2001. So we used this Sercial to make the 10-year-old and the 15-year-old. And now with the 22 years, we are very proud of it because the leftover is amazing. So you can compare how smooth and how expressive could be the signature of a Sercial 10-year-old, and then now how pungent, how this wine is talking to us, because the previous one, I would say that we could talk with the wine. We could define the wine under the patterns and references that we have, but this one is pungent. It makes our face change. It touches our gums. It's a wine which is quite expressive in terms of the acidity, but then very much balanced. And these notes that I have brought from the first one that you have tasted, the Sercial 10-year-old, it comes highly expressive into this wine which evolved in a singular way. We did not polish any of these corners by adding a little bit older or adding a little bit less in terms of the acidity. This was not a blend. This is a single wine and the leftover of that year. Wine of the year in this fair and Brazil that we have got now recently been awarded. Obviously, we are very proud of it. Anyway, I think that I should go on to the Bual 15-year-old. The Bual 15-year-old is probably the most consensual, I would say. Why? Because every one of us, since we were little children, we have been given a caramel or a toffee flavor. So this is a reference for us. It's very easy to identify the connection. All of the first things that you will get is this figs, the dates, the plums, the caramelish flavors, the toffee. So all of these are very much there. And at the end, if you focus your attention, you will get kind of a metallic mineral. This is planted at Calheta, especially on an area which is bringing out the mineralic conditions of a volcanic soil. So in Madeira, it is a kind of as if you play with coins and then you smell the hands and the pail is polluted, sort of saying, with this kind of connection to the volcanic minerality. Try to get it from the approach, the first approach, which is lavishing, bringing out a level of acidity which is significant to this wine, and further on you will get the back with the certain minerality, kind of bitterness at 90 something grams of residual sugar. Can you all
there's a lovely warmth to this wine.
Absolutely, yes.
You know,
it's very consensual.
Yes, you still have the lovely freshness, but it's not
Glowing.
It's not the crisp freshness that you find in the Sercial, or that sort of friendly charm of the first Verdelho we had. Here, yes, you're starting to get a bit more richness, a bit more depth, a bit more, yeah, yeah, to me, there's as I say,
it has more depth. It has more 3D effect in terms of mouth, because it fulfills, we are all very sensitive to sugar, to the acidity, to all of that. So that is a one which is really having a bubble of flavors. And then at the end, there's something strange, that the minerality where it is. It's something that doesn't have a direct reflect on references, whether fruits, whether sweets, whether whatever we can identify, something which goes beyond that. And at this level, we are talking of a 15-year-old. So the minimum that we have here, it's 15-year-old in terms of the wines and the wine that we have. And we have a little bit more than that, because sometimes we need to polish some corners in terms of the style of H&H. And we really have to underline our style. So if you don't have any further questions to this, but I just want to say that probably if anyone wants to start tasting Madeira, should start with Bual. It's the one that you easily can go on the fruit salad, on the Apfelstrudel, if I said it well, and eventually.
That sounds good.
And also some pineapple. This cuts through very well the acidity with this caramelish and toffee flavors. So
whereas, sorry to interrupt, Humberto, but whereas the Sercial and the Verdelho are versatile with sweeter foods, with cheese, but also with savory foods. When you get to Bual, do you sometimes serve that with savory food, or do you reserve that more for fruit and dessert?
It's more on a dessert or ice cream or well, it's very consensual. I would say that you even can go on some dry meat, some but the point is, with these caramelish flavors and toffee flavors, it's much more on the foodie side, on the ice cream, and something which is more on the dessert rather than as aperitif. But we are talking of 94, 96 grams of residual sugar.
It's fascinating to think that level of residual sugar might be comparable to something like a Sauterne, for example. Not much different.
You don't have this level of acidity and freshness which cuts through.
Yeah, so the freshness of that acidity, which is always present in Madeira, just makes it so refreshing. I don't get me wrong, I enjoy a glass of Sauterne as well, but it's to me it's a little bit more limited in terms of how you can pour it.
It's distinct.
Whereas this, even though you have all that sugar and the high level of alcohol, because you fortify to 19.5, 20%.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, you've got a really fresh drink, and it's really clean on the palate.
Absolutely, I agree. Yeah. Absolutely, yes. So further on, we are on the Malvasia. Malvasia is showing the true nature of Madeira. Why? Well, we started with this grape, so we are known in the world by Malvasia. We even had, after Ovidio, and after Phylloxera. As you see, this is in terms of total acidity, only 6. We have been tasting wines which reached to 9. The Sercial was 9 point something. So when we talk about residual sugar, we are at 110 grams of residual sugar on this. But in fact, Malvasia was the highlight for Madeira for many, many years. The word that we have, Malmsey, was turned around when we had the Ovidio and the Phylloxera, and we didn't have Malvasia because for a long period, we took almost 50 years to recover from Phylloxera, which really devastated our vines, and particularly the Henriques, which were wine growers. This company was founded in 1850, but the family, the Henriques, are here in Câmara de Lobos and the Estreito since the 1600s. So to say that our business started as wine growers selling their production to the British merchants in some of these wines, and we have a lot of our very old and auctioned wines which were bottled at the end because they were sent to the merchants, whether in the UK, particularly in the UK, but some in the United States. So after the 72 Phylloxera, which really was bad for Madeira and for all over Europe, but particularly ourselves, we had to defend, sort of saying, the remainings of our wine. So we created this Solera system, which was a way to overcome the difficulties and the understanding that we needed to stop the plantation pied franc. We couldn't keep on going planting direct on the floor, but having what we call the horse, so the rootstock, in order to evolve Madeira and recover Madeira the proper way. So Tinta Negra on one side was a very important production because varietal, because it was producing 15 to 17 tons per hectare, which compared with the white grapes, we have it just about 3.5 to 4,000 per hectare, which means that these wines need to reward the wine growers, because I usually say that we have two romances. We have the romance of the wine grower and we have the romance of the winemaker. The winemaker wants to make dated wines, special blends, whether 30, 50, 20, but the wine grower has a different romance. And the wine grower just wants to know how much money he will get at the end of the season when he passed the whole year working, and if he can ensure that the houses will buy their grapes, and at the end, how much they will receive for the work that they have done. So it's a completely different perspective in terms of what I was underlining as the romance of our business.
And
well, anyway.
Humberto, I remember you saying to me when you were showing me around the fascinating vineyards, we'll see more in the photography later, but that a grower very often will have bananas as well, and you're fighting against more bananas being planted because it's an easier crop to produce and they can make more money out of it.
Yeah, let's say
crazy.
that I like always to bring this to the discussion because it's the future of what we have to do. We have, as the whole producers here, invested in terms of infrastructures, warehouse, technicalities, and all of that we are producing these wines. We also have invested in the market. We have gone into tastings, promotions, even though that is very small in terms of the whole production. So we are limited in terms of funds, but we are profiting at the most that we can. Certification of quality, BRC, ISO 9000, well, all of these. But we need to involve the wine growers because this fragmentation of the properties, which is a result of the transmission along generations, is now causing some difficulties which really bring us to struggle with other cultures. And what and anyone can understand is that banana was organized in a different way. So there is now a company which is obviously from the government and helping the banana growers in terms of manpower, in terms of advising, in terms of accompaniment of their properties. And that is something that we need to bring into the wine growing here in Madeira in order to ensure that the lung of our business is going to be refilled year after year by a younger generation. We need to focus our attention on the young people who are now also being proud to become agriculture, viticulture, a wine grower, because this is at the end, it's money. The people need to earn, and it's not only the status, because these last generations, which are now with 70 and above, they have a son which is a doctor, which is an engineer, which is a lawyer, which doesn't have time anymore to come to the land. So this man is becoming old. The grandchildren are visiting the grandfather, but they don't want to stay on the land and to work from early morning down to the sunset. But we need to bring professionals in order to understand what we need to do on the land, what we need to do on the plant, how we can reinvigorate our plantations in order to couple all together in terms of the certification, ensuring that everything that we are doing since the wine grower, the vines, up to the bottle which is on the shelf, has been on a straight connection, wine growers, producers, and commercial. That is our need to the future, and for sure that we have to comply with some things coming out also from the government, because it's the support that we need all together to get to do something for the future of Madeira. Anyway, that's, in fact, you have unveiled a very important issue, which is the competition in terms of agriculture. And banana is probably, it's way more organized in terms of production. They have invested a lot, and now they can reach the market into the packaging that it is now necessary to be in the grand surface, on the big surfaces.
Yeah.
So we are moving to the Terrantez. I'd like to show you our vineyard. It's quite a nice vineyard that we have. Terrantez, it is a very difficult grape, I would say, to the wine grower on one side, because it's very sensitive. It's very, I would say that's when you think of Madeira, Terrantez is the silky veil over the other grapes, because in fact, it's very unique. It has the expression of the acidity. This is our vineyard. This is 1.4 hectares. It shows differently, as you see, from down to up the hill. It's very demanding in terms of carrying the boxes of around 60 kilos on the back of each of the men, which have to climb all the way through to the road. It's these little pines that you see on the top. It's the road. So we take our grapes from nearby the bottom of it, which is a little ribeira, what we call little water flow, and up the hill by manpower. We are ongoing to a special mechanization with the transport for these grapes, but it's not so easy under the orographic situation that we have there. And with this, you can imagine what are the plantations, as Joe was referring on Madeira. We have it concrete and terraces all over the mountain up to 1,000 meters high. So this is the demand for manpower, quite intense on the island. This is our Terrantez. Terrantez is ripening very early, so we have to vinify this at the latest, the 20th of August. This year was even earlier. It rottens easily, so we have to be very careful with it, and it produces an incredible wine. All of these difficulties at the beginning bring out a very silky wine, I would say. This is the vineyard seen from a different perspective towards the sea. It is protected, as you see, in terms of the sunshine exhibition. It takes the morning sunshine, but in the middle of the afternoon, the sun passes to the other side. So this is located south in a valley, and it's in fact what protects these grapes to bursting, because if they would have a long sun exhibition, they would burst due to the high level of temperature and heat. The skin is very sensitive. So the
when you see those slopes, it's a bit like the Douro Valley. I mean, all over the world, it's difficult to find the people to work in difficult conditions, but these are extreme conditions, aren't they? I mean,
absolutely,
you know, mountain
this
viticulture.
This is what we call the vin de montagne.
Absolutely.
They are in fact very difficult. But anyway, I was taking some pictures in the past with the man carrying some boxes, and I'm sorry for this informality, but my daughter, she was looking at it and said, "Are you showing these pictures?" And I said, "Yeah, it's very traditional, but you should." because this is exploration of people. Don't show it. I said, oh, you're right. You have a different perspective as a young child. I look at it and think of, you know, tradition and how we do it. And it's almost being proud. And you look at it and say, don't do that. Men are suffering because of that. So we really started to understand that we have to do something in order to facilitate, to make it easier in terms of transport from the bottom nearby the water flow up to the road. And we will, in 1 year or two, we will do that. But anyway, this is to show that, in fact, Terrantez is, in terms of flavors, you will notice that this is going on the tea, on the floral, much more rather than the fruity side that we have got. It has some, you know, some almonds, the white almonds, but the beauty is this: when you get into the total acidity of this is almost 8 with the sugar. In terms of the residual sugar, it's 74 grams, and we have this wine which is showing absolutely independently from these factors, acidity being it a refreshment, the sweetness being it the sustainability to the flavors, which are probably reminding when we are crashing the first leaves of autumn, this aroma which is coming out from the humidity. This is what shows most in the Terrantez, and why probably it's so rare and so difficult in terms of the aging process. It has a level of concentration which becomes incredibly expressive when it is an old but very old Terrantez. I always like to underline that I had a 24-hour joy because of Terrantez that we have sold years ago. It was the last of a 200 years set that we have, Grand Old Bual WS. And I was very happy with it. Well, we sold it with a single bottle at 6.45 thousand euros. And suddenly I received from an auctioneer a call and said, Humberto, do you still have Terrantez, Old Reserve? No, I sold the last one yesterday. I was proud, 6.5. He said, yeah, we sold one at 17,000. This is to tell you that this same bottle already reached $31,000 in the US recently in an auction. To say that the potential of Madeira, this little story that I wanted to share with you, the potential of Madeira to become a valuable wine. These wines, which are now considered the heavenly quartets from Henriques and Henriques, WS, the Grand Old Bual, Malvasia, first bottled in 64, and all of these collectible wines, they were sold 30 years ago at 400 euros, and they are now at 7,000 to 8,000 a single bottle. So as an investment, it is a fantastic thing that Madeira can keep on going, because let me tell you, I'm 98% sure that if I open a very old Madeira, that the wine will be wonderful. I'm not so sure in some other wines that when I'm opening, I'm shaking if the wine is very, very expensive. So to Madeira, I have to say that I'm at ease in terms of the outcome on the aging process, and especially on these valuable wines, which are reserve of value, I would say, for compared to many other wines in the world.
It's an extraordinary thing that these wines, once they're in bottle, I think I'm right in understanding they won't develop further, but if they're stored carefully, they will simply continue. They will hold that quality level, that plateau of flavors and quality for many decades. I mean, if not indefinitely.
Absolutely, you're right. These wines, apart from the fact that they evolve by oxidation, when they get into the bottle, and they transform themselves to the process of reduction, because it happens also. The flavors change when we stop this evolution to the oxidative process, because in fact, the acidity is always reactive towards the combination of the oxygen with the molecules of the wine, and it stops. There's no more need for that. It's like you stop this reaction, but it takes, let's say that the information is still there on the chemical side, but it stops. So it inverts, and this movement of inversion takes long when we are opening a bottle like this. pouring it in advance for it to again breathe and bring out the condition of what Madeira is about, because it's in fact closed by being in the bottle, by becoming a wine evolving by reduction rather by oxidative process. I would say that we have 3 levels of oxidation. We have a first level which we control, the second which takes an arrow of 40 years transforming phenolic compounds, and we have to understand what this is about, because in fact when we talk about Malvasia, Bual, Sercial, Verdelho, we have different flavors which are being changed along the oxidative process, and we lose the phenolics which will identify each of these grapes, but we gain a result which is the tertiary oxidation, which is the combination of the oxygen with the alcohol and the amino acids. So it brings out the curry, what we call the sotalon. This sotalon effect is the spiciness that comes out in some conditions different from each of these grapes, because what happens in Malvasia and what happens in Sercial or in Terrantez in terms of the long aging process, at the end you will have a completely different profile of these spices, which are something that we need to understand, especially on the flavors, because on the nose it's very easy. It's as much as if we are in Morocco or in some other places where there are some markets with the spices. We are not tasting the spices, we are scenting the spices, and we choose them because we season the food with them. We have that already on our nose. And in Madeira, besides the fact that you are tasting a very old wine and that spiciness comes to your pituitary, and you are informing your nervous system with some things that you don't have as a taste, suddenly it goes in a different perspective. You have profiles of different grapes being oxidized at the tertiary level, showing different profiles of spiciness. It can be a little bit confusing or complex, but it's what Madeira is about. It's layers of complexity which are added along the aging process of Madeira.
So we've got a couple of questions actually that have come through. And if I may ask, could you say more about the use of heat? You said that some, but not all wines were subjected to 45 degrees. Perhaps you could go into a little bit more about how Madeira is made.
Very simple. That's very simple. We need that on the entry-level wines, 3 and 5 year old. It's difficult for us to have only in 3 years what we can get to this temperature. And we had that experience when these wines were crossing the tropics. Remember, we are placed in Madeira and we have been internationalized by the British Empire. So all of these wines which were crossing the tropics to the Indies were coming back, some of them much better because of this heat where these wines had been submitted. So we recreated in the early 1700s this estufa, and we need that in order to provoke the caramelization of the residual sugar, which is in fact fructoses. Fructoses is an isomerase of sucroses. We don't have sucrose on these wines. We have absolutely fructoses, and that fruit is the characteristic of these different grapes, which shows completely different, but particularly Tinta Negra will show an incredible change after crossing the hothouse. The hothouse has to be controlled. We don't need to have the coil inside, which is obviously having an average of 45 degrees, but under a heat of the coil, which is way higher, provoking some caramelization, excessive caramelization. We have now the jackets around the vates where the water is running around and bringing it smoother to this temperature of 45 degrees along the period of 3 months, where it shows those caramelized fruits and crystallized fruits that we need in order to identify Madeira to the style that we are prompting out. So the other, what we call the canteiro, it is a completely different process. As I said, the warehouse makes a difference because whether we have it height or nearby the sea, the temperature is higher or different, and there is a slow process of aging. Let's say that if we want to get into the market with a 3-year-old wine, Without the hot house, it is very, very difficult. We could do it under the zinc, not controlling the temperature into the warehouse, but it would be something which would obviously influence even the wood, because the wood cannot hold these wines at that temperature. It would open the pores and the wines would be jeopardized through the influence of the wood. So the most important here is to distinguish that there are two processes of Madeira: canteiro, to the wines which are aging slowly along the period, and the hot house for the wines which need only 3 years in order to be bottled. The first wines that we have in the market are only 3 years of age.
And there's nothing on the labels to tell you that whether the wine has been made by one system or the other, but we can assume that because of the cost of the wine. So as you say, the wines with more age will be made by Cantera method, you know, the long aging in barrel.
It's not
so
even
it's
the
purely
price, it's more the age. A 3 or 5 year old, you need a hot house.
Yeah.
Above that, you only have 10-year-olds. So 10-year-old is already a wine which will be submitted to the Cantero, which will produce the same equivalent thing that we would get after the hot house, the Estufa.
But even so, I think the modern techniques that you were referring to just now mean that the results that you now have for a 3-year-old, for a 5-year-old, are much finer than they used to be. They're much more subtle. You don't get the same rusticity that maybe we used to have.
But there is
so actually,
well,
we saw it with this 5-year-old. It's such a delightful wine.
This 5-year-old doesn't have Estufa. It's only
sorry. That's why.
Well, anyway, it's still, we could still taste our wines, and they don't have that. But why do we have this incredible change? Because remember, until the 2000, 65% of our business was being carried to be bottled at the end. So we were exporting to France, to Germany, and these wines were what we call the sauce Madeira. So which kind of hot house we would have at the end, the wine would be used as a cooking wine, which is very important. We cannot press a button and replace this amount of wine which is in the market. We are very proud to use our Madeira to cooking. I use Madeira to cooking. I only use higher Madeira because I have it. But rather than that, I advise people to use Madeira also to cook. But since we stopped the expedition of Madeira in bulk and started to bottle at the origin, then we are signing these wines not to cook, but to drink. You can obviously use whichever wine, a 20-year-old, a 50-year-old, to cook, but it's up to you. The problem is, for us, we need to be in the market with a wine which already is thought by ourselves. It has the signature of ourselves, so we needed to do it in a different perspective. And I think that we all, I talk about all the houses, we all have been concerned with the wines which are being into the market. And when you taste now a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old, as you said, Joe, they don't have anything to do with the old wines which were in a coil. Coming out from that coil, the temperature of the water inside the coil would be around 80 centigrade in order to have an average of 45. The wines which would be in contact with this coil would have this rusty that you have mentioned. It would be above a little bit, and sometimes they would show in a negative way. But I can challenge anyone nowadays to taste a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old coming from any one of us. You only will distinguish the style of each of us, the message of each of us, but you will taste a nice 3-year-old.
Excellent.
Second question, you said that you had two questions.
I have two. So how long can you keep Madeira once it's opened? And does it change depending on the level of sugar? So the higher sugar wines, the higher residual sugar, they last longer, whereas the drier, the Sercial, will not last as long?
When you talk about Madeira, it's always the acidity which will prevent the oxidation of these wines. Other than that, you have sweet wines in the other world. Obviously, if you increase to 300 or 250 grams of residual sugar, these wines will really have difficulty to get jeopardized, because the sugar also prevents the oxidation of these wines. But when we talk about wines which are in between 50 to 110 grams of residual sugar, the residual sugar doesn't make that huge difference. What makes a huge difference is, in fact, the acidity. This is why the Sercial takes longer to age to the same level in terms of time elapsed as Malvasia or Bual. One and the other, they show completely different, but that the level is exactly the acidity.
And Humberto, where once the bottle is open, where is the best place to keep it? If not everybody has a perfectly cool cellar, so once it's open, where would you keep the wine?
The most important for Madeira is to stand, because the acidity contacting with the cork will always jeopardize the cork and will jeopardize, obviously, the wine. So any Madeira should be standing. And after opening, the most important is to lead it back, because the fact is, if you leave an open air on a plate Madeira, the acids will struggle to the level of the most that they can, but then the wine will be jeopardized. So it will become vinegar. Yeah. So the most important in terms of the aging or the oxidation process is control temperature. If you are having these wines in a hot place, they will not last as much as if you have them at 16 to 20, or even in your fridge. So the most important for it is controlling temperature and preventing it to have a constant struggle with the oxygen, because there's no way, even with all of these strengths that Madeira has, to prevent the cycle of nature. It will jeopardize one day. The point is, if we prevent it in terms of controlling temperature, standing up, not contacting the cork, and also storing it in a place where you will not have this amplitude of temperature, you don't have a great problem with Madeira. We have wines which are open for more than 5 years, bottles which are very expensive. We just serve a sip, and they are at just below average, and they are perfect.
I think that shows even more just how amazing Madeira is, that because I think people with fortified wines, they sometimes think, well, I'd really like a small glass now, but I might be, a week or so before I want another one. With Madeira, you can actually keep it for that long. Absolutely. And you can come back to it again and again and again, but you don't need to drink, unlike dry sherry, you don't need to drink it all in one go.
Absolutely.
Tempting, as I'm sure it would be.
I usually don't underline that, because my preference is that people are consuming Madeira the fastest they can, obviously.
Absolutely.
But I recognize that, in fact, Madeira has this incredible capacity to last long. And obviously, it's one of the advantages of a cook, because he can pour a little bit and keep it back and again without having to change. I'm not nominating any other wines which are also used in the cooking side. But in fact, Madeira, to cook, and if you have it at home, you just pour a little bit on steak, on this, on that, on crabs, and you will have your Madeira for a long-lasting period without any problem of it becoming jeopardized. Absolutely, yes. We do the enslavement of these wines before they get into the bottle. This is why we have this kind of warehousing for the wines, for them to become what they are.
I love a comment that's come through. Looking at it from this perspective, Madeira is actually quite a bargain.
It is.
Absolutely.
It is. As I said, remember that these bottles that we are probably talking about prices of Madeira nowadays that will become in 20 years ridiculed, because I remember 30 years ago we could still talk about 1700s, wines from the 1700s. There were some 1795. So nowadays we have some sites already having these wines at 100,000 euros, at 70,000 euros. So this means that in the future, whenever very soon the 1800s are up to finish in all of the houses. We have some other of my colleagues, they do, but this will the demand is increasing, the prices are going higher and higher because obviously the demand is the market working. But very soon, we will not be able to talk about these wines. We are a very small region. This is our silverware, I would say. This is our silverware.
Yeah.
We can talk about these wines. Sometimes people say, do you want to sell your old wines? I want, but it's not my concern. You know, it's something that really makes me talk about the history. We have some wines which have a connection with people which are already retired or some which passed away. And these have a connection, an historical function here inside of the company, which makes us talk about the company. This is our history. These wines on collectors' lists are incredible. When they go into the auctions, they are incredible because they talk about Madeira. They are a vehicle to bring Madeira into the market.
Yeah. So Sarah's asking, is Madeira more in demand now than
Yes,
it was in the
is.
past?
Yes, it
Do you
is.
think
We
it's
have,
kind of had a resurgence?
when you look into Madeira, sometimes people ask you, which is your best market? There are markets which show average price. We should measure Madeira on one side, the volume, and I would say markets which bring a lot of wine into them, France, for example, or Germany, but the average price is just about €6, which means that this wine is being, even Japan, it's around that level of price. When we talk about the UK, when we talk about the United States and some other markets, the average price can go up to 15 per liter. This means that we are talking with the market, which is importing 15-year-old, 10-year-old dated wines. They understand Madeira in a different way. And that is, the average price of Madeira is increasing year by year in terms of generic wine, which is being exported, which means that if we want to supply this demand in the future, we have to increase our stocks for it to age at the level that we can comply with the demand to the 10, 15, and even higher, because that is as much as the world starts importing more in different perspectives, because in fact, what we need to bring into the market is Madeira on the 3 and 5-year-old, because this is what is going to feed our capacity to keep on going with the business, the rotation of our stocks. As much as we sell the 10, 15, 20 dated wine, this is immobilizing wines. We do it, as I said, the other way around. So forcing ourselves to put a lot of wines aging in our containers for them to become what we want in terms of collectors, vintages, dated. But this implies investment, immobilization of capital.
Excellent. So Peter's saying, I thought I didn't like Madeira, but I've enjoyed the wines tonight. I've clearly had some bad examples, but you have changed his mind.
Thank you very much. That's very nice to read.
I think that's the thing. And there are so many, there's such variety across the different styles and quality levels as well, that actually, if you're lucky enough to be able to taste a few, you'll probably find one that you do like, because there is that amazing diversity, even within a small number of grapes. Relatively few grapes are planted.
To underline the differentiation of these grapes. I remember some years ago, I was on a table in Japan, and there was a colleague of mine talking about the history of Madeira, the history of his family coming to Madeira and so on. And suddenly one of them, which, our connection to their culture had nothing to do with our history, the Huguenots, all of what happened in the 1700s and later on to what Madeira is about. It doesn't have any connection to that side of the world. And one of them said, but please tell us, how do I drink your wine? And that message is the most important thing. I think until the 2000, most of everyone who was involved in the wine, the message is, how do you make your wines? Where is the alcohol coming from? Which level of strength do you have your alcohol? When do you stop your fermentation? Density, pH, all of these technicalities which do not create any demand. At the end, when we talk about what for is this wine, why do you write Malvasia and Sercial and Verdelho? That is the most important. That is something that you are bringing flavors to the mouth, celebrating life. Why will I bring some Madeira to celebrate life with my friends, having a special sorbet, having a special dessert, having some of my things, consommé, pâté de foie gras? I will look for a wine, not only Madeira, but the profile of Madeira, which will adapt to what I want to celebrate life. It's not just telling you, oh, this is a dry wine, having that experience. I tasted this, is wow, fresh. It pumps me up. Yeah, do you want more? No, no, no. It was only an experience. You have got that experience, but it's not a beverage. A beverage is when you say, wow, this is nice. I want more. Yeah, please. And you just bring out your glass. This is consumption. This is a different message that Madeira has to bring into the market, because we are so small and we are not simple. We are complicated, I have to say. We are proudly complicated because we really need to do it in a way which takes time and a long time, along the aging process. There are decisions which can really bring the wines to a really bad situation, or decisions which will bring the wines to a really high level. And you cannot imagine at the beginning what you will do with these wines. As I said at the beginning of our presentation, we cannot foresee, we don't have a crystal ball to say, I will separate this batch of wine in order for it to become a vintage. No way. There's no way. You have to evaluate along the tasting your wines and say, wow, this one became exactly what the H&H produces. This is under my signature. Okay, let's put it in the market. Other than that, you really have to work out in the warehouse towards a wine which really takes a complexity of effects to become what it is.
I think that's a fascinating reflection, because there are a lot of parts of the world where a winemaker or a marketeer might describe the fact that the vineyard makes the wine or the wine makes itself, whereas actually this is probably the best example of where the wine in those barrels behind you that we can see, that's what determines what that wine will become, because the barrels, even in the row of barrels we can see behind you, even if it's the same batch of wine from the beginning, each of those barrels will taste different because of the slight differences in where they are in the warehouse. So it really is that aging process that these wines enjoy sometimes over many, many years, that determines their future, their destiny, which is absolutely fascinating. And I'm so full of admiration for you producers and your expert teams who are the blenders. The blending process is absolutely critical, so that you not only do you make a style that is very much H&H, it's your own stamp, your own personality, but you also get you get a degree of consistency of style, but then you get the individuality between the different lots or the different colliators. So it is endlessly fascinating,
which is incredibly nice. The consistency. We have had Peter Cossart in this company, which made 53 harvests. He passed the testimony to Luis Pereira, which was here with me yesterday. He's now 76, and he stood here for 41 years. I worked with him for 17 years, and I'm here for the last 30 years. We always have carried out the testimony to the next generation. We didn't have new ideas to come in. We just brought the ideas, we analyzed them under the experience of what we had been doing in the recent years and the past years, and we got into consistency. So producing what we do under the style of Henriques and Henriques. That is very well spotted, Joe. It's consistency.
I love your comment about being proudly complicated, because it's another way of explaining the intricacies of fine wine. It's always very difficult to answer, well, what is fine wine? Well, I think this is a very great example of what fine wine is all about. And it's fascinating when you hear the numbers, you hear the detail behind that complexity. Over 1,500 growers supplying those 8 significant producers. And and even more striking, I've just come back from a trip to mainland Portugal, to the Alentejo, and had a wonderful visit to Espanol, which is a producer that I admire very much. And their property is 2,000 hectares, 500 hectares of which is planted to vineyard. And that's about the same as all of the vineyards that you have in Madeira. Just one property in the Alentejo. So it is simply extraordinary. And we've seen with the beautiful images that you showed us, we've seen how difficult it is to make wine there. So we're very glad that you do, I have to say, having had the privilege of tasting all 6 of these wines. They are a lovely, lovely representation of those different styles. Members will have probably noticed that 3 of those wines are wines that we have followed consistently for many, many years. They often, one or other normally comes through in our wine championships tasting. Sometimes it's Sercial, sometimes it's Bual. It varies. But the other 3 wines, which are currently available, are all new to us. So they are even more of a treat for us to be able to taste those and share those. So please do take the opportunity, because as you've discovered, particularly the Colheita wines and the 20-year-old Terrantez are made in very small quantities. So the availability is not huge.
And I think the other thing that's really come across is that these are the wines that you can buy, you can open, try. They go superbly with food. So do experiment with different dishes and, see where your taste lies. So don't just kind of go, oh, well, this is sweet, therefore try them across different styles of food, especially if you're having lots of different nibbles over the Christmas period. And rest assured that once you've opened them, you don't need to drink the whole bottle. Or you quite easily could. I think Madeira is always a downfall. But because it's just so delicious, I think it would be hard not to drink the whole bottle. But, if you're worried about, gosh, I buy it and I don't want to do it all in one go. You can just it could be a treat, a glass a night.
I'm going to raise a glass in thanks to Humberto. Thank you so much for spending your evening with us.
It was such a pleasure.
I've just poured myself another drop of this exquisite Terrantez, which I'm now going to enjoy. I'm not going to spit this last bit. I'm going to drink this one. Thank you so much for being with us. And we will look forward to seeing you again soon, I hope.
Very much.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to everybody for attending. It's been a pleasure.
And to Catherine as well. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks now. Bye-bye.